Storyteller's Thread, a monthly podcast devoted to young adult literature and the art of storytelling. I'm your host, Sean Connors. On each episode, we invite an author for young adults to take us inside their work, and in doing so, to talk about their writing process, their inspiration for writing for young readers, and the general ins and outs of earning a living as a professional storyteller. So, whether you're a compulsive reader, an aspiring writer, a teacher or librarian, or simply a frustrated reader who's counting the hours until you get home and dive back into that novel that's waiting for you on your nightstand, this is the place for you. Hey everyone, it's July 1st and you're listening to the Storyteller's Thread. I hope your summer's off to a good start and that you've got lots of fun things lined up for the upcoming 4th of July weekend. This month I'm talking with A.S. King, who published her 11th novel for young adults, Dig, just this past March. If you haven't read it, Dig tackles racism and white supremacy head on. It's an important book, it's a raw book, and like pretty much everything that Amy writes, it's a brave book insofar as it wrestles with subject matter that all too often ends up getting swept aside because people aren't comfortable talking about it. Dig was a tough book for me, and it left me thinking for days. And within hours of finishing it, I reached out to Amy to invite her to talk about it in this program. So I'm indebted to her for taking me up on the invitation, as she's a remarkable writer. Actually, that doesn't even do her justice. If you've ever met Amy or you've heard her talk about her work, you know that she's a remarkable and an inspiring person. Before we get into our conversation, as always, I'd like to recruit your help in my quest to build an audience for this program. If you know someone who's interested in children's and young adult literature, or who aspires to write for young readers, please let them know about it. If you work with young people and think that there's something in this program that's worth sharing with them, please by all means do so. If you're a hermit and you're not currently interacting with other people, you can still help me out by taking a second to rate the program on iTunes or Google Play. Regardless, I appreciate you tuning in and supporting this scrappy little podcast. I know that there's lots of other things that you could be doing right now, so thanks for listening. All right, that's my pitch for this month. Let's get into my conversation with A.S. King. I hope that you enjoy it. A teenage girl wanders the streets of Philadelphia and encounters past and future versions of herself. Another, unable to love herself, sends her love to passengers on planes passing overhead. In his dreams, a bullying victim tries to fulfill his promise to his grandmother and rescue his grandfather, a soldier who went missing in the Vietnam War. Welcome to the surreal world of young adult author A.S. King. Born and raised near Reading, Pennsylvania, Amy Serig King, who publishes under the name A.S. King, began writing fiction in her early 20s, but didn't publish her first novel, The Dust of 100 Dogs, until she was 40. Since then, she's emerged as one of the most prolific writers for young adults working today, publishing nearly a book a year for the past decade. King is the author of several critically acclaimed novels, including Please Ignore Vera Dietz, which was named a Michael L. Printz Honor Book, Ask the Passengers, which won the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, and Gloria O'Brien's History of the Future, which received the Amelia Walden Award. A review in the Bulletin called King one of the most original YA writers today, and the New York Times Book Review called her devotion to passionately experimental style in a genre that's often beholden to formula inspiring. King's peers hold her in equally high esteem, with no less than John Green calling her one of the best YA writers working today. According to Publishers Weekly, King's work is distinguishable by 3 traits. There will always be elements of surrealism. It will make you uncomfortable, and it will challenge you to think. These traits are all on display in Dig, which King published in March, and which examines the corrosive effects of polite, affluent white supremacy on 3 generations of one family. Dig is about a lot of things: racism, poverty, domestic violence. Like all of King's books, though, it's ultimately about teenagers supporting each other in a world where adults have abandoned them. In an interview, King once explained, "The first time I knew that I wanted to be a writer, I was standing in the lunch line in 8th grade, and I had a legal tablet, and I wrote down this line that said, 'I want to write books that help adults understand teenagers better, and teenagers understand adults better.'" As fans of her work know, that's precisely what King's books do. I read something about you a few years ago that I want to verify with you.
Okay.
Is it true that you left the United States for a period of time and you relocated to Ireland where you renovated a farm?
That is correct. Yeah. I lived in Dublin for 2 years where my husband's from and renovated a house there. And then we went down to Tipperary, bought a farm, a derelict farm, and restored it. And then we lived self-sufficiently once, pretty much by year 2. So for 10 years, yep, that's what I did. Lived in Ireland, middle of Tipperary, living off the land, farming food and breeding chickens.
When were you there?
I was there from 1993 until 2004, 1992 till 2004. It depends. There's a little part in the beginning where we went back and forth. So
I'm curious, what motivated the decision to subsistence farm?
Well, part of it comes from where I come from, I think. A nice, cushy, middle-class, rural upbringing. But my mother had grown up on a farm, and you always kind of wish you could do that, I guess. Maybe it was in my blood. I don't know. I mean, I grew up gardening. We had a very large garden. And so I grew up, that kind of stuff. But it was always a pain in the butt, weeding. I mean, who wants to do that? But once we got to Ireland, it was already the plan. I remember actually going to a Borders bookstore in Philadelphia where we were living and buying a book I still own, which is called The Seed Starter's Handbook. And it really taught you how to grow things, from seed and how to collect seed, things like this. So I bought that on sale at a Borders bookshop in Rittenhouse Square. And so I guess we always had it on our mind. We knew that, that was just how the family had set up how they were going to handle everything from my mother-in-law getting older, that kind of stuff. So we got to it once we got there in Dublin and kind of got her sorted in a one-story house because the other house was too big anymore. And then we went on our way. The biggest move, really? Okay, the biggest thought, I had started writing novels when I lived in Ireland, or in Dublin. So I'd written my first 3, I think, there. And I realized that I wanted to fulfill this idea of being a writer and eventually publishing a book. And I knew that I couldn't do that with a full-time job up to my ears. And so I was able to kind of go after the dream. And then when we moved to the farm, for me, the self-sufficiency part of it was, hey, if we do this, which is what we met as survival counselors at a camp. Let's be fair. We taught survival skills. So, we were already sort of in tune. But it made me realize that as long as I could pay the bills, I taught literacy at night to adults, which was really got me into my love of writing for young people, to be honest. And as long as we could pay a few bills and we could eat, we'd be fine. I wouldn't have to get a full-time job. And that's exactly how it worked. And so I wrote 7 novels altogether. And then when I got back to the States, I wrote another one. So it took about 15 years to get published. I started at 24, got published at 40. But those years being self-sufficient allowed me the chance to grow as a writer.
So you were in Ireland in the 90s. And I believe that your first novel, The Dust of 100 Dogs, was published around 2009. So there is a significant gap in there from the time you start writing until you become a published author.
Yes, very.
What allowed you to persevere and continue writing during that time? Because I imagine you were receiving rejections.
Yes, many of them. Well, first of all, I think I have to write. And that's how ironic coming from me now, because I haven't in months. But I have to write. I certainly did then. I think I turned to writing as well, being a stranger in a strange land. I hate the cliche, but I threw it out there. Being surrounded by all these Irish people, all these people who I really liked, but they were all in my face and they believed I was an American, right? And that even back then was not great. I mean, I had 10-year-old boys tell me anti-American jokes, at the 4th of July celebration, my mother-in-law, threw for me because she thought this was a huge deal. And I'm like, I really don't care about the 4th of July, but I'll have some barbecue. But this little 10-year-old kid just started, doing the, really bad anti-American jokes. And I was just supposed to sit there and nod. And during that time as well, I experienced I was experiencing stuff in my life that required me to have an outlet. Let's just put it that way. And that outlet came out the first 3 novels were on a typewriter. And that's always fun because at least it makes a noise, right? It sounds crazy, but it makes a nice fat noise and it's rhythmic and you can get into a trance and get out of the world. So it's just like reading a book in a way, but it's I guess, a bit more intense. And what kept me going? I have to. I did give up a few times on the novels and went into poetry. That's actually my first published work was poetry.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and it's still something. I mean, I try. I mean, again, not in the last 6 months, but I try and write a poem every day. And usually in 31 days in a month, most of them will suck, but 2 of them will be amazing. And so if I do that, it keeps going. But how I kept going is A, I'm stubborn. B, I had to. And C, what I was hearing, especially from the later rejection letters, because at first the first rejection letters should have just said, you suck. That's what they should have said, and that's fine. But they're very nice about it. At least back then they still sent rejection slips. But for me, once I started to write work that was publishable, that was something that was good, most of the feedback I was getting was, hey, this is really weird. And what I've learned in the 15 years since is that and this is kind of a provocative statement, but I'm going to throw it out there because why not? A guy sending weird work goes, wow, this is really weird. But a woman sending in weird work is the same look those boys in shop class gave me in 7th grade. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's just sort of, you're weird. So I thought that was rubbish. So I was like, I'm just going to keep writing and eventually somebody will see. And it was the Dust to 100 Dogs that got picked up. That was rejected on both sides of the Atlantic, I think, by every living agent at the time. And this one editor called my agent at the time and said, do you have anything weird? And my agent at the time had 3 novels of mine. That was the one he could not pitch. He just couldn't pitch it. So he hadn't sent it to anyone because he didn't know what to do with the Dust of 100 Dogs. And he said to this guy, yeah, I do have something weird. That's how I got published.
I want to talk to you about the weirdness of your books. The books that you write are set in the so-called real world, but they generally incorporate some element of the miraculous, whether that's a teenage boy waking up from dreams and discovering that his dead grandfather's left him objects, or teenage girls who acquire the ability to see the past and the future as a result of drinking the ashes of a dead bat. What draws you to tell stories that are steeped in magical realism?
Well, first of all, you got to look at what I'm eating, right? When you look at an output, you got to look at what I'm eating. So what do I eat? Early on in those first years, I mean, I had a tech degree. I was a darkroom worker. My degree's in photography, and technically, for me, it was mostly chemistry-based. What did I eat? I started with all the things I thought I would have had to read in college. Okay, so just line up every dead white guy you ever met and stick him there. And that's who I read, from Hemingway to Faulkner to a lot of Camus, a lot of Kafka. See, suddenly you're like, and then a lot of Burroughs. You're like, But I still would say Vonnegut would top my list. Anyway, I don't care that he's a white guy. He tops my list in pretty much everything. His humanity is out of the park, and I love it, and I relate to it. But then you got your, Marquez, you have Allende. Once I started to get, wider, and really the book that got me to the desk to write was Salman Rushdie's Satanic Verses, though Midnight's Children is, as you probably know, stunning as well. So that's one of the reasons. The other reason, once we go into, you write for younger people. I write for people 14 and up, and I really mean and up. So for me, I wanted to write the books I was always writing, which I had mistakenly thought were for adults, but always started in the teen years. So I was technically writing YA that whole time. But when I think about what it's like to be a teenager, whether it be my experience, the experience of many of my students, let's say in rural Ireland, who left school under harrowing conditions and never learned skills or learned limited skills, to when I look at my own, teenager's life, Being a teenager is completely surreal. I think it always has been. So, first of all, I mean, to argue Will Alexander's point, which I think is correct, I mean, magical realism is really owned by those who come from, colonialized areas. I'm a white Pennsylvania German woman. I'm a Northern European in Pennsylvania. Like, I can't get any whiter. I've talked with Will a few times and said, I don't know where this came in, though. Do you think maybe it was because I was living in Ireland and you're living in, whether you want to call it post-colonial or whether you want to get into political debates about the North, that's a different thing. But the surrealism is really where I've kind of gone, I don't know, I've walked closer to that, I think, because it's easier to tell the truth if you're shaking it up. So if you're going to tell the harsh truth of what it's like to cower in a corner as a high school student who is 17 years old and has been cowering in corners, preparing for an intruder since they were 6, you have to do it in a way that not just tells them their reality, they already know it, they're living it. You have to create characters that grab them by the neck. And in order to do that, I think the only way to do it is to sort of counter that reality with the feeling of what it's like to cower in the corner, and that is totally surreal when you really think about it. And so I think that's why. I think reality is a lot. Maybe it's a spoonful of sugar. Let's just call it a spoonful of psychedelic. But it helps, and it for some reason really, I mean, it really, I don't know. I think I want to bring readers to their personal own knees. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's not their knees because they're watching this happen to another person. They're seeing what's happening to the character and relating to it so so completely that they're on their knees looking at a thing that they've been told to look away from every single time they've had to cower in the corner. They got to go to algebra class next. I think that's bullshit. I don't think that's how we should be treating our kids. I understand the readiness. Fine. Give them the rest of the day off with some therapy dogs. Let's really learn about psychology and let's see what it's doing to our kids, because it's really, really doing a lot.
I want to pick up on that point. From Everybody Sees the Ants to Reality Boy to Still Life with Tornado and now Dig, your books often revolve around characters who have experienced trauma.
Correct.
And who are searching for mechanisms to help them cope with it.
Yep.
As a person who studies young adult literature, I feel like a growing number of books that I'm seeing for young people are addressing trauma.
Yep.
What's driving that, do you think? Is that something attributable to the larger culture?
I can't really speak to the trend why anybody else writes it. I mean, I've always written this way, so it's sort of...
Yeah, talk about you.
What drives me, yeah, absolutely, is to help. That's really it. It's just to help. If you can read a book of mine, and it doesn't matter, I'll use Dig as an example just because it's new, so I've only gotten so much feedback. I've gotten feedback from someone as young as 15 and someone as old as 75, and all these ages in between, and it's the exact same feedback. It's almost the exact same sentence every time. It goes like this. Oh my God, you just wrote about my family. Holy crap. How'd you know about my family? And oh my God, this is my family. Every single time, 75 or 17, they're saying the same things. That to me means I feel like I did my job in bringing something to the front of their heads that had been in the back, right? But trauma is something that's always interested me, and I think it's because I experienced it. And I think that I know the stats. When you read Everybody Sees the Ants, hopefully you noticed that I might also be involved in the vagina monologues and V-Day. And in the fact that I know my stats. I've worked with a lot of survivors, and working with survivors of trauma, depending on all the different traumas and all the different stats, right? You got 1 in 3 over here, 1 in 4 over there, 1 in 6 over here, 1 in 8 over there. The fact is, when you look out into a huge audience of teenagers, and there's 2,000 of them there, what is it? Every other one? Every other one. Maybe everyone. Maybe every third one. I'm not sure. But there's enough trauma in that auditorium that what I want to do is help in a compassionate way. Not in a blamey way, not in a preachy way. Just try and get people to see other people so that they can see themselves better. I don't know. In the end, I just want people who are experiencing trauma to talk about it, find help, which is almost impossible anywhere. I mean, this country is really bad for mental health. And then to be able to heal. And that's actually one of my favorite part of writing now. And I said it in a lecture the other year, was I'm not sure if I write books to write the books anymore or to just be able to continue going out and meeting young people and people who work with young people, because it's It's stunning. Like I can do my little thing that I do. It changes every time, but I pretty much say the same stuff. I talk about trauma, talk about that kind of stuff, and then there's a line of students who need to talk to me. And in that line, there's somebody who says the truth for the first time. And then we have a conversation. And it's amazing because a lot of times you'll think, oh, God, hysterical teenager, right? That's what we always think. No, they walk right up to me like an adult and say, like an adult, I'm putting big air quotes around that. Like a teenager is what I should say. I wish we could all be more like them. And they straight up tell me what happened. And I go, okay, now, and we talk about what happened, whatever it is. Yes, it means I get to hear crappy stories a lot, but I can handle that. And that's why I write about trauma, because it's a stigma. We don't talk about trauma. It's ridiculous. And trauma actually changes your brain, changes the way you're going to be. When I'm in these auditoriums, I say, well, what kind of partner are you going to be? What kind of employee or employer are you going to be? What kind of father, mother, parent? What are you going to be if you're crippled by your own trauma? So you have to look at it now. Look at it soon. I know too many people went to the grave with their trauma. Too many people waited till they were 50. Most of my students didn't come in at the literacy center till they were over 40 because they realized they couldn't read. That's insane. You'd think people like us, we're so privileged, we can read, that you'd realize it. You'd be surprised at how many people who don't have the skills don't actually know it.
I'm thinking of the feedback you shared from your readers who connect trauma to their families and their response to Dig. In your books, the trauma that your characters experience more often than not is connected to their family histories and family secrets. I wonder if you could talk about what it is about family and family history that interests you as a writer.
Family and family history is one of the more, I think as we move through life, we see it differently. So I guess it might be most of my books, my books are always about what I'm dealing with now. I never have to go back to my teen years and mine stuff. I have a box full of journals, still haven't opened it. So I'm always looking at what I'm dealing with now. So maybe because I'm just about 50, this is the time when you start looking at things like that and going, hey, where did I get the idea that I have to be friends with everybody in my family, even if they treat me poorly? Let's use that as an example. I was talking to someone recently, a psychologist, who was talking about how there hadn't been enough research, and there really wasn't much data at all, about it wasn't estranged family. It was estranged families or estranged siblings. I can't quite remember the exact specific thing. NPR did a piece on it right around that time, so it was sort of kismet. I think it was a sibling-adult estrangement or something. But it was the fact that no one had ever done enough research, and I thought, what? That's nuts. Did we all think we were the Waltons? Did we all believe that what we were told, and what we were told was solid, and I believe it, and I used to say it every time, what's the most important thing to you? You look back at interviews with me, you look back at anything I ever answered about that, and I would say family. Didn't matter that I lived 3,000 miles away. Family was most important. But now I look at family, and family is still very important to me, but I look at family in a different way because you get to a point in life and if someone's, still bullying you like they did when you were 2, it's time to go. Like, I don't have space for that. And you find a lot more people, like the more I talk to people, a lot of them have that. I look at Please Ignore Vera Dietz, right? Please Ignore Vera Dietz, there's the secondary character there, is Charlie. And Charlie is dead. That's not a spoiler, but he does get his own speaking part from beyond the grave. But Charlie's background and the reason he was the way he was and he made the impulsive decisions he did was because of the household he grew up in. He grew up in a house where his father hit his mother and controlled his mother in really intimate, strange ways. And he only throws out a few details. You don't need any more. And Vera knew what was going on at Charlie's house. And so she worried about Charlie. But she could see that how he grew up is how he ended up lost. And so, when I speak of it and dig in a white family, right, structure, I'm white. It's all I know. You know what I mean? Like, so I look at that and I go, what are we doing here? And the biggest problem, I think, is silence throughout generations. We don't find out. I remember when I first had to get a mammogram and I had to call my mom and go, Mom, did anybody in our family have breast cancer? We don't even talk about that. We still whisper that one, like in the funny movies, cancer.
Yeah.
Right?
It's absolutely true.
We do worse with mental illness. We don't, and especially in teen years, we blow it off constantly. And I've got a bucket full of stats on that, and they're harrowing. They show nothing but this is not going to get any better. It's actually going to get worse. It already is getting worse. So for me, you are where you come from so often. And we believe this myth of, well, you can make yourself anything. Well, that's true. depending on your trauma and depending on how you're handling things right now. Like you can look at how you're handling this. Where did I get my skills? Where did I get, these things? How efficient am I being? So many of these things come from how we were raised.
You've given me the perfect stepping off point to talk with you about Dig, which, if I'm not mistaken, is your 11th novel?
I can't remember, but I think so, because I still keep the numbers in my head of the actual novels I write versus the ones I publish. Because to me, that matters. So I'm at 26 now.
Oh my God.
That's cool.
Oh my God. Okay, could you give, for listeners who haven't read Dig, could you give them just a general sense of what the book is about?
Woo. Yeah.
That is tough.
Okay.
That's why I'm asking you as opposed to trying to do it myself.
Okay. Dig is about, it's about 3 generations. So we go from boomers to Xers, would be the parents' age, and then teenagers, 5 teenagers, specifically in this book. And it is very much about whiteness and how what we'll call everyday polite middle-class racism passes down through silence.
I listened to an interview that you gave Kirkus Reviews, and in the interview, you suggested that white people are ill-equipped to talk about race. Can you talk about why you believe that's the case?
We're not equipped with it because we're not educated properly. We're only educated on white history. So right there, we think that the only history is white history, and that's why we have Black History Month. That doesn't make any sense. Same as women's history, and we could go into that too. But I think, look, I'm going to give an example because it's best. Recently, we've had some political situations where men and only men are deciding the rights of women, especially connected to the reproductive systems. And if you ask these men what birth control does, or what this is, or what that is, stuff that women would know inside and out, just because, what's a pap smear? These guys can't answer. And when they do, they're cocky and answer incorrectly. They don't understand anything. And they are in control of making all the rules for this other group of people that do understand these things. And this is sort of the same reason why, white people are ill-equipped, because just like these men, we're uneducated. We don't know how to talk about race. We've been taught that talking about race is racist. That's one of my favorites. And if you really want to hear more about that, please download the audio or buy Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility. It is the best book. And she really gets into how we have really built a beautiful system of just slipping and sliding down that water park and not ever even having to talk about race. And when we do, we are sadly really only equipped with bits and pieces and sound bites of stories we heard from our uncle or things that my mom told me, or that idea that, look, I'm a great person. I'm not racist. And you're going, honey, this isn't about you. This isn't personal. Look at history. Take a minute to yourself and understand that you're white in America, and that actually means something. And you could do something amazing with that. Or you can choose to continue to just slip down the water slide. At least notice you're on the water slide. I mean, we don't even get there. And so, yeah, I don't know what else to say. We're uneducated, we're ill-equipped, we don't see it, we don't experience it. So why would we? Same as men making laws about my reproductive system. It makes no sense. But that's how, and the laws and the system is broken as designed, period. All the way, like from every single aspect of our lives that we think about, that is cushy, was made so for us.
In the acknowledgement section of Dig, you write, and I'm quoting you here, "This book is supposed to be uncomfortable. I'd apologize, but I'm not sorry." From a reader's perspective, I can tell you that you were very successful in realizing that goal, that there were several times when I found reading the book profoundly discomforting, but in a good way. Can you talk about your decision to write a book with the intention of purposely unsettling your reader, and why you're unapologetic for having done that?
This isn't new for me. Again, working with V-Day for the last 10 years, I don't know, maybe a few times, maybe 4 of the years, I wrote or reposted something I wrote, and actually it says, I'm not sorry if this makes you uncomfortable, I think was the name of the essay. So I've had that idea, and the reason is because no one likes to talk about rape. In fact, the people who just listened to that word rape being spoken got freaked out in hearing it. Same as they don't like to hear the word, and the big ones, Suicide. Mm-mm. No one likes to hear that. Although they have a lot of opinions on it. Let me tell you what. And we don't like to talk about racism at all, and more especially being white. I've left some jaws on some auditorium floors when I say, "Hey, you're white. What's that mean?" They're like, "What?" Like it's an insult. I'm like, "I'm not insulting you. I'm white too. Check it out." I'm not there. I don't want to make people uncomfortable. I want to make people think. And the only problem is that I want to make them think about things that make them uncomfortable. How are we going to change? How are we going to change? Right? If we can't say the word rape and talk about it openly, then how are we going to stop the madness that is the rape culture that we live in? And, oh, well, there is no rape culture. Oh, buddy, I'm so sorry, but there is. And then you try and explain what a microaggression is, and you're just so, again, you're just, and this is it. I watch my friends of color explain basic microaggressions to me when I've made them. And I'm like, oh my God, I never even thought of that. Like, it takes me 2 days to process it, and then I write them an email and go, I am so sorry. And they're like, dude, it's cool. Like, they're so used to it, but they shouldn't be. Same as I shouldn't be used to the things I'm used to as a woman, let's say. Or teenagers shouldn't be used to being blown off just because of their age, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But making people uncomfortable, look, I don't want to make them uncomfortable. It's not my fault they can't talk about stuff that's real. That's kind of how it works. So that's why I'm not apologetic, because in order to make a change, you have to talk about it. I'll give you an example. My V-Day chapter raises money for a local Planned Parenthood. Now, the reason we do, it's specific earmarked money, like any money raised, okay? If anybody runs a nonprofit, they understand it. It's earmarked for one specific thing. Technicians who can do a colposcopy, which is an internal, it's a camera into the vagina. And they're trained to report to a court properly, because in nonverbal rape victims cases, meaning under the age of 3, where people can't testify, the victim can't testify, that footage from that camera is considered child pornography, so that cannot be viewed by the jury. So any damage done to that individual can't be seen. And so this person is trained to report in court language so that we can win more cases and put more rapists in prison. Now, can you imagine how many people were just made uncomfortable by that 45-second description? And I have a relative who's like, oh, Planned Parenthood's horrible. I'm like, listen, if this would happen to your child, let me tell you, there'd only be one place to go to take them for this service. You know how I know? Because we put it in place. And it's this place. Otherwise, you're driving to Philly or further with a traumatized kid. You really don't want to do that. And they're like, hold it, Planned Parenthood's there for that? Like, I'm like, I don't know about the other ones, mine is. So, if we can't talk about that, then how are we going to lower the numbers of kids who go through that? If that is what's making you uncomfortable, change the P to a C. If rape makes you uncomfortable, and it should, it's a horrible thing. But then what about race? Why is race so hard? Why is it so hard to see that, yeah, actually, you have advantages if you're white and in America? And people will hear that and go, but I have never, no, you're right. I've never had anything handed to me either. I get it. But it's just so large that it makes people uncomfortable. It's a large idea that's very difficult. But again, I'm going to say it again. Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, what a book. And if someone is interested in really, if they're listening to me now going, what is she talking about? Please read that book and just take a deep breath. It's a compassionate book. I'm a compassionate person. I don't want to make anybody upset. I just want people to see the truth. And the truth is uncomfortable more often than not, Sean.
Could you have written Dig a decade ago, do you think?
Heck no. No way.
Can you talk about that?
I just was in a different place. At first, when I got published, dude, after 15 years, you're like, crap, I got to write something. And it has to be YA. What's YA? What is it in America? Because we didn't have that. Like I didn't read a lot of YA books in Ireland because there really weren't any that way. Now they do. I was just there last year again, and they definitely have a YA section. But back then they didn't in the way we do now. And so I just wrote and wrote and wrote. And those stories were coming from what I was going through right then. So Vera Dietz was about, coping with the loss of a friend of mine. That's wide, but still. Ants is absolutely about that turtle and that squid. As much as it's about Lucky Linderman, it's really about the parents for me, because that's what I was, that was my situation, and that, so I wanted to write about that. And so, as you go on, plus I don't think I lived in America long enough. I think 15 years back here, especially with that gap I mean, you see things very differently. America changed a lot in the 90s and 2000s. I left before 24-hour news, right? So before I left, if you wanted to catch something on the news, there's only 3 times a day to do it. And I came back to 24-hour news and more Rite Aids than anyone could ever possibly need. So I think that definitely is one of the reasons why. And then, of course, I mean, my age. I think it's my age. I think it's also raising kids. And going through those motions my parents went through, like driving me everywhere and taking me all these places and making sure I had, basketball sneakers and, doing those things. And I think my mind was just, the books are who you are at that time, if that makes sense, which is why I'm not writing at the moment. I am writing, but man, it makes no sense. Let me tell you that.
That's sort of the impetus for my question was the last point you made. I found myself thinking about the extent to which Dig is a product of the historical moment that we're living in right now. And of course, racism has been woven throughout the history of the country.
Yeah.
But just with all that's happened in the manifesting of it so publicly, I just found myself wondering if that book had to be written at this time.
Funnily enough, it was started long before the election.
Was it?
Which is interesting. But just like Laurie O'Brien, once that election happened, people kept saying, "Did you see this was going to happen?" I'm like, dude, I didn't see it. It's been happening the whole time. You just didn't notice. It's that thing that makes people uncomfortable again, Sean, right? When it comes to this is a personal journey. I have wondered, and I wrote a piece for a book list, I think 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and it has the same sort of tone. Like, here's the truth. Like, I eat the truth for breakfast. I'm not here to sugarcoat it. But yeah, I mean, kismet on the timing, really. But the whiteness was definitely something that came from my childhood because of where I grew up and because the very simple first step of any white person looking at this going, hold on a second. Up until now, I thought racists were the people who were extreme. They either had swastikas on them somewhere, they had a hood somewhere in a closet, they get together and march with tiki torches, whatever it is you want to consider what a racist is. That's not a racist. That's an extremist. Racists and people and racism. I mean, racism is something so much broader. And so for me, I grew up thinking that and believing that. Of course I did. And I mean, I didn't even consider myself, I don't know how to explain it, like simply because of things like the music I listen to, the interests I have, the things I read. I thought I was different. And then I suppose I'm not different. None of us are that different. In that way, through the racial lens, through the, what are you? You're white. That's it. Where, and you're in a country that was built for you. So yeah. And that is, obviously now, it's a very contentious point, which it really shouldn't be, but it wouldn't be had we been taught the true history of slavery right there. If we just went straight up and if we were taught slavery, how do I say this, over the amount of time, since most of our history still stops at the Second World War, which I find interesting because it did when I was in school too. I'm like, what? Which is why so many history teachers have said to me, oh, thank you for everybody sees the ants, because now I can talk about Vietnam. I'm like, brilliant. But yeah, when it comes down to it, I mean, we're not taught that.
As your career's progressed, do you feel like you have more of an obligation to call your readers' attention to social and political issues today than when you first began writing for young adults?
No, not really. No, I think it's the same. I think in a way, maybe it's growing more because I'm getting better at, maybe it's because I'm getting better at how to actually make a book, but it's also because you get older and you care less about who you offend. Which I love. I just read the opening of Slaughterhouse-Five the other day, and it's like, oh my gosh, I was 50 when I wrote that. Or was it? No, it was Breakfast of Champions. Sorry. Either way, he's there like, he's talking about 50 like he's old, and I'm going, what? But no, I think you get older and you kind of, it's not that you care less, it's you care more. You care more. There's time's running out. I have to help as many people as I can before I croak. That's kind of how it feels. I mean, and at this point, it's like I also see how profitable talking about things that make people uncomfortable is. Just in case you didn't know, it's not. And so, I have three other jobs that I have to juggle in order to continue to write. And so that keeps me pretty humble, but it also keeps me close to the people I want to help. And it keeps me kind of in the game of knowing what I'm really doing here. I didn't do this to do anything other than get my feelings out. And then some other people said, "Hey, those are my feelings too." And then I just wanted to keep doing that. I don't know. It's strange, but yeah, it's more like a time's running out. I got to hurry up and just keep doing that. I don't seem to have a vampire. No offense to vampire writers, I flip and love vampires, but I don't have one in me. I don't have a series in me too. I always feel so bad about it. I'm like, I just don't have a series in me. I just can't do it. And that's just how it goes.
In preparing for our conversation, I went back and I revisited a number of your books. And as a reader, my impression was that your recent work, and I'm thinking specifically of Reality Boy, Gloria O'Brien's History of the Future, Still Life with Tornado, and certainly Dig, is characterized by what I sense is a growing sense of indignation. Much of it inspired by how adults interact or maybe fail to interact with teenagers. Is that a fair assessment, do you think?
It is. It is. When I go into classrooms and I do workshops with, basically anybody really, I have a little cartoon that ought to get made. You ever see the quote he talked about Beethoven, what Beethoven was doing, that Beethoven was just screwing around like all the other kids, and he did something, and what came out was this beautiful music, and then he was just some kid in Indianapolis just farting around, and this thing came out of him, and it was a disgust for civilization. I would absolutely say that, and this has been the message I've been giving in my workshops lately, is that, especially to young people, see how many young people are surprised when I ask them what they're angry about? They're like, what? I'm like, just write down 3 things you're angry about. They're looking at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, hold it, y'all are angry about stuff? They're like, no, we're really angry about stuff. I'm like, well, why can't you write it down? They're like, nobody has ever asked me. Like, I'm scared to write down what I'm angry about. And I thought, no, and that's what I say to them. I'm like, dude, then your writing isn't going to hit anybody. Because unless you can pull something you care about so much that it does disgust you, then, that's teeth. That's the teeth. You need that when you write. And if you don't have it, it's just a story about Mary and Johnny falling in love, and that's great, but you need teeth. So what is it about Mary and Johnny falling in love that you don't so much like? And we talk about it that way. So the disgust for civilization would definitely, that's how I would put it. And it's not like I sift through the human condition for a living. That's what I do. And I look around, I look a lot of places. I look at a lot of people. I experience things, and I want us to get better. We're not well as a country. Like, if we had doctors for countries, we're not well. I mean, we do, technically. They're the stats that, who puts out or whatever, but we're not great. And we are still strolling along, smoking 2 packs a day, having 2 6-packs at night, and not thinking about this. Not generally, obviously. We have epic marathon runners and people who do these cool things. But I'm just saying, as a country, on a psychological level, I think it's getting worse. And yes, I absolutely think that it's not so much parenting. I don't think parenting's getting worse as much as I'm seeing that the attitude toward teenagers isn't changing. The mental illness or the mental health of teenagers is getting worse. There are things we could do to help, and we are not. And then we go back to money, which is really what Dig's about as well. Money, love, and race. 3 things people really don't like to talk about. Although love, they like to do that, but the lack of love, they don't. Anyway, yeah. Definitely not impressed with the fact that we actively encourage our own children. I do it. Everybody does it. To not talk about the things that make other people uncomfortable, especially in the case of things that have happened to them. We're not giving them a place to go to talk about things.
In Still Life with Tornado, one of my favorite moments in that novel, a teenage girl named Sarah remarks, and I'm quoting the book here, I think we're really smart when we're young. I think this kind of smart isn't something they can measure with tests. I think it's like being psychic or being holy. If I could be anyone for the rest of my life, I would be a little kid.
Yep.
It's just so amazingly articulated. And I wonder, is that a perspective that you hold Do we have an intelligence when we're young, do you think, that's not available to us as adults?
Absolutely. We have emotional intelligence when we're young, and we kill it. Kill it with knowing the stats of the thing, or knowing what the political story is today, or deciding to be this or that, and then having to stay in that place. Absolutely. And I know you listened to the Kirkus podcast, so you heard me say that, adults are just pretentious teenagers, and then I joked about it, so I don't really mean that out of context, just saying it. But it's, no, something happened. There was a moment in my life where I knew this girl. She had a brother who was 2 years younger than her. She was 20 when I saw her. I was just happened to be around, and she rolled her eyes about her brother. Oh God, he's such a teenager. And I looked at her and I was like, dude, you're 20. Like, have some compassion for the kid. Like, you were just 17. Like, and we really do have an issue with ages that start with the number one. I often say to kids, not kids, students in high schools, will be like, remember when you used to you ever trip over the rug because you got a new pair of shoes on? They're like, yeah. I said, remember when you were 3 and you did that and it was adorable? And everybody said, oh, are you okay? They're like, yeah. I'm like, does that still happen to you when you're 13? They're like, yeah. I'm like, what happens now? Get up off the floor, get in the car. Right?
It's true. Yeah, it's true.
And I'm not immune. Like, we've all done it. Like, it's just how it goes. And so, and we can talk about the frontal cortex and blah, blah, blah all we want, but there's something missing in that age group. There's something missing for everybody who passes through it. Like, everybody, like me too, you too. We've all passed through it. But for some reason, we want to erase it, like Men in Black style, the minute it happens, and we can't talk about it, or if we do, we glorify it. And I mean, obviously, I'm this age now. I can't remember most of the stuff I did in high school. I can remember the really good days and the really shitty days.
The difficult subject matter that you write about notwithstanding, are you hopeful for the future?
Very.
You are.
I am. A lot of people would talk about the kids from Parkland, and they would say, this group of young people gives them hope because they chose to fight, and they're still choosing to fight. And I think that's really great. And I agree, they give me a huge amount of hope too. But even before they were so publicly known, I've known so many teenagers who have these thoughts and have these feelings, and they want to change the world. And I guess, maybe it's just a default. I don't see hope in my generation. Maybe it's that. That's a horrible thing to say, because I see a lot of people in my generation that are great. But on a whole, look at where we are. I mean, you can only go as far as your setting allows you to go, right? So we're in this setting, and this is where we are. What can we do? And we have a system, of laws and all this stuff. And so my hope is with younger generations, because what I really hope they start to see is, if they start to see these things I'm talking about and start to become properly, that I don't see it in the system, but if they can educate themselves on race, or at least notice, say that there's a massive inequity, that they might be the generation that, if enough of them turn their minds to that it just gets better from there on out. But it's a long road. The people in control are never that generation, right? You're never the generation that's in control. And I think one of the things that's funny, and one of the things about Barack Obama that I enjoyed, was that he was kind of almost from my generation. He was close in age to me, and that made a big difference, because there are differences in generations. I'm a bit of a Strauss and Howe fiend, so I'm not going to get into that. But yeah, I do have a lot of hope. I have a hope in individuals too. I do. I have hope in individuals and the resiliency that we are actually capable of. It's a beautiful thing to watch someone just be able to bounce off of a trauma, still acknowledge the trauma, still be in treatment for the trauma, and then go and kick ass out in life. And I don't think we actually explain to people that that's possible. That, hey, if you speak your truth, you can still go do really cool stuff. In fact, you're probably going to do it with a lot less guilt, shame, blah, 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 fear. So, yeah, absolutely. And I hope that our discussions, especially about mental health, really increase as time goes on, social emotional literacy in school programs. But you're looking at decades. You're looking at more generations. But I just think that, I don't know. And I could be foolish. I've been foolish my whole life. Why else would I pick art as as, as a way to live. I could be foolish too, but I'd rather be foolish than hopeful than just a complete curmudgeon. Again, I know Vonnegut well enough to know what he was like. And I don't really want to go there. It's not nice.
Incredibly, and I say incredibly because you generally publish a book a year. Incredibly, you have another novel due out in October.
Oh, I do, yeah.
The Year We Fell from Space. Are you able to give listeners a general sense of what you're going to do in that book?
You bet. Both my books that came out this year are ironically timed, not ironically, but just oddly timed for what I'm going through in life. Dig was supposed to be out end of last year. I think it got pushed. So that's how I ended up with 2 in 1 year. I don't know why you need to know that. But anyway, The Year We Fell from Space is a middle grade novel, my second middle grade. I came into it still not knowing if I wanted to write middle grade or not. But I knew I had the story in my head. It is about Liberty Johansson, who, if you go back to Ask the Passengers, right? I'll throw the connections in, right? So I was outside one night. It was nighttime. A plane went by, went overhead, and I sent love to it. I've been doing this since I was 6. So it's sort of weird, Amy in idiosyncrasies. Sometimes that end up being huge things that, huge, the fulcrum on which my books, kind of work. That didn't work. The word fulcrum should not have been in that sentence. But anyway, with Liberty Johansson in The Year We Fell from Space, she is a stargazer. She looks at the stars a lot, and she makes her own constellations versus going by the old ones. Though she does know the old ones, because you got to know the old ones to know the sky. But she has a little sister. She's dealing with her parents' separation, and she's dealing with very vague and very short mentions of the fact that her father does suffer from depression. And because of the separation and because of what's happening, those thoughts start to bubble. She starts to wonder, is she going to suffer the same sort of fate as her father? And no one really talks about it. So she is navigating all that stuff while going to her last year in 6th grade and dealing with her little sister. But basically, it's about, I guess, resilience again, right? It's about going through tough times and being able to stop and care about yourself instead of caring about what everybody else wants you to do or thinks you should do, which is worse.
I know that I speak for a lot of people when I tell you thank you for your books. Thank you for being such a strong advocate for young people.
Thanks.
And from my perspective, thank you so much for making time to talk with me. That's really generous of you.
I really appreciate your interest, and I appreciate the interest you have in this weird lady who lives in this little town. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your support very much because
Absolutely.
For someone who does what I do for the reasons I do, that's actually what matters. That's what matters the most, is your support.
That's our show for this month. If you haven't familiarized yourself with Amy's work yet, or if you're still waiting to read Dig, by all means do so, and do it soon. Thanks for listening. I look forward to seeing you back here next month, when we'll continue to talk about the craft of storytelling. Till then, have a safe 4th of July, and happy reading.